Today, I want to welcome Christian Brim. He is the founder of Core Group. Christian is probably one of the most interesting CPAs I've talked to, and he has a unique approach and he has a unique perspective. Christian works primarily with creatives who need to be profitable, and it's the subject of his book, Profit First for the Creative. And so, even if you're not a creative, I think there's some valuable lessons here. I think a lot of business owners don't have a command of financial literacy. This will not be an episode that basically you can go, get your CPA certification at the end. What I know about Christian is he's going to put it in language that's relatable and actionable. And so listen in. I'm looking forward to this episode. Christian, welcome.
Thank you for having me, Craig. I'm assuming that you haven't talked to a lot of accountants if I'm the most interesting you've spoken to.
Well, so my wife's ex-husband was a CPA and eventually a CFO. I worked in industry for a while, and if I talk more from the CFO perspective, I noticed that there's two types of CFOs. The overwhelming majority of CFOs came through the controller ranks.
Mm-hmm.
Their sole mission in life is to tell you no matter how much money you're spending, it's too much. And
Right.
to chastise you for whatever, if you saved some money. And true story, I made a capital equipment purchase where I went off and negotiated a smoking good deal from a Fortune 100 company. And we were just a small startup. And I got 25% off the price. And I went and told the CFO, and her immediate response was, go ask for more.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's not that the derisive term bean counters isn't a well-earned moniker. It is. And you definitely need those no people in your organization to tell you, no. But our role as advisors to small businesses is not that negative. Certainly, we can point out the potholes and bridges along the way, but we're not in the business of just saying no.
Yeah. The other type of CFO that I've seen, which is much more rare, is somebody who comes from the investment community. And when you talk to them, they're open to budget discussions, but their number one question is, if we spend, 10 million on this, what will we get in return? And if the answer is 20, it's a very interesting conversation to them.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think a competent CFO, and it's an interesting term that's banted around, especially with small business owners, because there's a lot of fractional CFOs now, and there's usually a disconnect between what a CFO actually does and what the marketplace thinks they do. I think a good CFO is part of the management team that is yes holding the rest of the team to accountability for things like return on investment, and profitability and margins. That's certainly part of their job. But I think the bigger part of the job is to help the leadership team navigate the potential pitfalls with their business plan. So, we want to grow this much. Okay, what does that look like for the business? What are the potential pitfalls if we do that? Being more proactive in nature.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's as people are listening and they're trying to decide whether they're going to listen to the rest of the episode.
I swear it'll get better.
they're, I mean, I think that's what they're on guard for is, they look at the controllers, CFOs, financial folks as, basically they're, the ugly stepmom that just goes around and says whatever you want. Their answer is to say no.
Right.
And what I hear you saying is, no, if you're doing your job is to help the business accomplish its goals
Yes.
and to do it in a way that that doesn't leave the business shipwrecked.
That's exactly right. My father-in-law is also a CPA, and he was corporate, but then he moved into bankruptcy consulting. He came out of the airline industry, so he had a lot of experience in that. And he is what you would call the quintessential hatchet man. Like his job was to come in and fire people and tell them no. And he, frankly, he's an asshole, and he fit that job very well, right? And sometimes you have to have people like that. I get that. Unfortunately, I think a lot of CPAs are much more comfortable in a spreadsheet than in a conversation.
Yeah. 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 So, and I think, well, let's back up because we want to get into that a little more deeply, but let's get back to how you ended up focusing on creatives. And again, I think you have a message that's regardless of, if you're a creative agency or not, I think there's something valuable here for everyone. But how did you end up deciding on creatives?
Well, we did a very methodical MBA type approach. I asked my team, go through your clients and answer two questions. One, do you like working with them? And two, do they value what you do? And that was the only two questions. Being accountants, you'd think there'd be some kind of profitability analysis there. No, we didn't do any of that. Just answer those two questions. And over half of the clients that were on that list were in creative industries. And so that's what we decided to lean into.
Yeah. That's so simple and profound. I mean, when I'm working with people, I can't count the number of times that I've had a client come to me and it's very clear that somebody gave them some instructions that they need to be either, someone to everybody, or they had to go focus on this. And it was very clearly not who they were comfortable being. And my advice has always been, you will never be as good being someone else as that someone else you're trying to copy. Why don't you be your best you?
Yes, 100%. No one else can do
Yeah.
it.
And you don't have to try. You just wake up every day and you
Right.
do it naturally.
Right. No, that's a good point. I think a lot of business owners, myself included, you get into business and you don't really have a lot of expectations, and or you have expectations that aren't grounded in reality. But we tend to play roles around what we think other people want us to be, or what we think that should be, rather than being genuine to who we are. And you might be successful, but you're not going to be satisfied.
Yeah. Well, and something else you did in that, and this is actually a little bit more of a marketing question, but you were narrowing your scope of potential clients. You weren't expanding your scope. What
Oh
what
yeah.
what motivated you to do that?
Well, we had gone through. I call it the wilderness. I had become so fed up with running my accounting business that I left it. I left it with my brother, who is my partner in charge, and I went off and started a software company for 2 years because I was just sick of clients, sick of employees, just fed up with it. Unfortunately, the business did not perform as well as it should have when I was out of it. And so I had to come back in. But I said, well, we're going to do things differently. And it was at that point that we implemented EOS, the Entrepreneurial Operating System by Gino Wickman. And part of that process led to the wholesale change of the business. I bought my brother out. I had another minority partner, bought him out. We actually continued to shrink, shedding lines of businesses, services offerings that we cut. And the establishing a target market was just part of that process. We had to scale back before we could grow further. I think what my colleague calls an entrepreneurial inflection point, we'd reached the point of my personal limit and we couldn't grow beyond that. And so I had to grow myself, a lot of self work to be able to be what the company needed me to be. And that allowed us to work on these tactical things like, establishing a target market. We'd had a target market. I'm not saying we didn't have one, but it was not nearly narrowly as narrow defined as it should have been.
Yeah. Well, and when we were in the green room, one of the things you said was, you didn't use an MBA approach on this, and I didn't respond, but that made my heart leap with joy. And I've realized in recent years I have a real disdain for MBAs, not for them personally. I just look at what they do to very good companies. My wife used to work for NCR, and rumors were going around that they were going to be acquired by private equity. And when she told me that, I said, well, the very first thing they're going to do is the MBAs are going to come in, they're going to cut customer service.
Yes.
And guess what? That's exactly what happened. And I see it again and again. GoDaddy, which used to be an absolutely phenomenal company, they went private equity. Bob Parsons just wanted an exit out of the company. Perfectly understandable. He'd worked hard. And bit by bit, the private equity guys have sucked every element out of that company that used to make me passionate about being one of their customers.
Well, sure. I mean, I think a lot of people don't understand the private equity model, but the private equity model is to cut costs and consolidate. So it's interesting because now in the accounting space in the CPA world, non-CPA owners are allowed in all 50 states, and it's brought in private equity. And I've sat in conversations with my colleagues and kind of mapping it out, what this is going to do to the industry, what it's going to look like. And, it's exactly what happens when private equity comes into any situation is they're going to come in and cut costs.
Yeah. So how do you navigate this? So one of the problems any business faces is, you know, is you have to manage expenses, you have to grow, you have to manage expenses, and it feels kind of overwhelming, and sometimes you feel like you have to take these kind of heartless activities that the MBAs do when they come in and they chop chop chop.
Well, yeah, and look, we don't get into, or if you did get into business for the easy questions, you made the wrong decision because there are difficult choices that we have to make, like our decision to shrink. That was, as an entrepreneur, the hardest thing I had to stomach because it felt like failure. But sometimes you do have to make those difficult decisions, and they're unpleasant. They affect people, and it's not fun. But to me, it's more around what's your intent. So when I started the business, it's kind of like you turn on a car and it's automatically idling. Well, that the automatic function of any business when you start is to grow. Well, that's great until you grow to a point where the complexity of the business starts to overwhelm you as a person, overwhelms your processes, your systems, your people. And all of a sudden, you're working harder, doing more as a company, but making less money. And the question is, why are you growing? And being intentional about, I want to grow to do this. And then those decisions become easier. You're not making them just by default or reaction.
Well, and coming back to what you said a few minutes ago about the role of a CPA or CFO or whatever title you want to use is to help the leadership team make better decisions to achieve their goals.
Yes.
And one of those goals, growth for the sake of growth, if I'm hearing you correctly, is probably not the best goal.
Well, it can't be the goal. And it can't, I mean, I'd argue that it can't be the goal for any company, including the large publicly traded companies. But certainly with small businesses, it can't be the goal. The goal cannot be, I just want to grow and make more money, because making money, creating value for others is the purpose. The money follows that, right? Like if you don't create value for others, you're not going to make any money. But I did, and I think a lot of business owners get that backwards. Is I'm going to grow and then I'll make more money. No, you need to provide more value, be purposeful in how you do it and how you organize and structure the company, and the money will follow.
Yeah. One of the challenges, and I certainly would say this is, I hear, I hear jargon. And I'll give you an example of one that, even though I think I understand it, it still intimidates me, is like inventory turns. And
Mhm.
I hear terms like that. I know they have meaning, and I know they're important, but I have trouble translating what it means to me.
Right. Well, as I said, I think people, professionals, use complicated terms for a variety of reasons, one of which is they want to display competence, right? They want to seem like they know what they're talking about and are smart. But if you can't put information in someone's hands such that they can use it, right, that it's meaningful to them and that they can act on it, that information is worthless.
Yeah. So how do you do that? I mean, so that I would imagine there's a challenge because, when you get your CPA, you've gone down a rigorous path and you've been tested with a rigorous test of, can you describe the finances of a business in a way that's, generally accepted accounting principles?
Oh,
And
absolutely not. I can't explain gap to anyone. So,
okay, but anyway, these are your terms. These have meaning to you, and then you have most of the people in the business that just like have no idea. How do you purposefully make it meaningful to people, or is it hopeless?
no, I think I I get asked when people find out that I'm a CPA, they say, "Oh, you must really love math." And I'm like, "Well, the hardest math I use is arithmetic, and I learned that in second grade. So it's not really math. It's more like a language, right? And a shorthand, even, but it's the language of business. And just like when you make a trip to a foreign country, you might have Google Translate, but you're going to probably commit some key words and phrases to memory so that you if you're not able to communicate, where the bathroom is. I think that accounting and finance is very similar. I think every business owner or anybody in a business has to have some functional understanding of the numbers that they're involved with. Like not everybody needs to understand inventory turns in a company, but the way the salesperson understands inventory turns versus the accountant that's in charge, or the inventory clerk that's in charge of managing the inventory levels, that means something very different to both of them because they have different jobs, right? And it's about using accounting and finance, the numbers, as a communication tool.
Hmm. So, given using the example you just had, how do you make these two different entities talk in a common language in a way that's meaningful and helps them achieve their goals?
Right. So here's going on with that example. The salesperson has a very different job, very different goals, different constraints than the guy that's in charge of managing the inventory. To a salesperson, if something's not on the shelf, they can't sell it. That's a bad thing, right?
Yeah.
And so they're never going to say we have enough inventory, right? The inventory clerk, on the other hand, has a completely different perspective. More inventory means more work for them, right? And so what you have is really an internal conflict in the business. It's a friction point, right? And so it's not so much as explaining inventory terms to them as it is helping them understand where each of the other is coming from and how they can work together to optimize each other. Like there's no perfect solution where both of them get what they want. That's not possible. So it's really being able to communicate between the two of them. Yeah, there's numbers involved, but they're all wanting the same thing, and that's what has to be communicated, is what is our overall goal here. Our overall goal can't be just make all the sales we can, and it can't be, well, we keep inventory as low as possible because it's a pain in the ass. It those are not the business purposes, right? So it's about helping those individuals understand their role in the overall business objective.
Mm, yeah. So I have basically two questions as we wrap up. One is, the first question is, when you come into a business,
Mhm.
what is your process? What are the things that you start looking for? And kind of the question behind that question is, what are the things that you know are most often left unattended that need the most urgent action?
Mhm.
And then the second question is, for a business owner, what are three things that you would recommend that they do, whether it be have, competency or take action or something like that?
Okay. I think in small business, and that could be a company with several $1 million, I the fundamental problem I see in most businesses is they don't have good accounting processes. And I understand accounting and bookkeeping is not sexy, and it's not seen normally as a value add. But if you don't have good processes in place to understand your numbers timely, accurately, and completely, then who you as the owner or management, whatever, is really just guessing. Um, and I've seen so many times businesses come to me and they present with these symptoms, and they think that the symptoms mean that, there's something wrong with the business. But the reality in a lot of those cases is they don't have good accounting processes. They don't have good systems. And, until you have those things, you really can't diagnose where your problem is.
Hmm. Okay. And so for business owners, what are three actions that you would have them do? What, after listening to this, what are three things they should go focus on?
Well, processes would be one. I don't think most business owners can do that themselves. They need to hire competent external help to help implement those processes. It just consider it as an investment in the framework or structure of your business. Like pouring the foundation on a building, you got to have it. There's just no way around it. And a lot of people balk at the cost and the time, but you can't short circuit it. The second thing I would do is I'd focus on your margin, your gross margin. That's where the profit is in your business. A lot of businesses do a lot of volume, but they don't make enough margin on it for the effort. And so I would take your gross margin, which is your sales less the cost related to those sales, and benchmark it to your numbers historically, benchmark it to your industry, and work hard at increasing that margin, because that's where the profit is. And then the third would be the direct labor efficiency component. And that direct labor efficiency is simply your gross margin divided by your total labor costs. In the vast majority of businesses, the easiest, most efficient way to have more money and grow your business is to manage your people, right? If you're in a service industry and you're not making $2 in gross profit for every dollar that you spend on labor, you're doing something wrong. And focusing on the gross margin and then your labor as it relates to gross margin will get you 90% of the way there for almost all businesses.
Wow. Well, I like that. That's very actionable. Will you say that one more time? So for every dollar of labor,
Yes,
you should have $2 of
gross profit.
gross profit. And
That's
just
correct.
focusing on that gets you
Yes,
90% there.
yes. Now that's for a service industry.
Yeah.
If you've got a manufacturing business, that ratio is going to be higher. It'd probably be 4 or 5 to 1. But you can figure out what your industry benchmark is and then beat it.
Wow. Well, I love that. That's simple, that's actionable, it's clear. Now, you work primarily with creatives, and your book again is Profit First for Creatives. So, for somebody who is listening and wants to get in contact with you, how do they reach you?
The easiest place is just my website, christianbrim.com. All my social handles are there. You can buy the book. You can listen to my podcast, The Profitable Creative. That's the easiest way.
Okay. Where can folks get your book?
You can get it on the website, Amazon, Barnes and Noble. There's audio version. Pretty much anyway. You just can't go down to the library and get it. I haven't got any libraries to buy it.
That's all right. I'm wondering how much the traditional library will continue to stand.
I
I
love the library. I go to the library all the time.
Yeah, I haven't been in years. Interesting. Well, Christian, this has been great. Thanks for sharing these insights on leaders and legacies.
You bet. Thank you for having me, Craig.